Welcome, folks. Nice to see everyone. There's a concept that has been getting discussed more and more in psychology, a field that I teach in, have training in. And the term is cognitive fusion, cognitive diffusion. And just wanted to talk a little bit about that. I mean, in so many ways, what I write about is about that, actually. And the basic idea is that the consciousness, the mind, whatever, life itself is generating seemingly these constant interpretations of what's going on, right? We're the ways in which things are being labeled and described and characterized and categorized constantly, right? And this, we could say, is our knowledge of what everything is. You know, my knowledge that I'm sitting in a room, looking at a computer, having a conversation with others on their computers. I mean, that's all an interpretation of something, right? So the idea of fusion, cognitive fusion, is where we imagine that we've fused the world, reality, experience, whatever you want to call it, with our interpretations. And we basically imagine that the interpretations of reality equal reality. Okay. And the interpretations are many layered, aren't they? So we have, you could say, the initial interpretation, something arises experientially, and consciousness gives it a label, puts it in a category, a descriptive label, like that's joy, that's sorrow, that's fear, that's the initial label. And then, of course, there's the layers on top of that that can go on top of that of additional ways that it gets rendered, interpreted, made sense of, and everything from why is this happening to me? When is this going to end? This is a problem. What's wrong with me for having this experience? How can I fix this experience? And so on and so forth. How can I avoid this experience? Those are all additional layers, right, of interpretation. So, you know, for example, you're driving in a car and suddenly the traffic comes to a halt, and we call that a traffic jam. So that's the initial label, the interpretation of that event. And then on top of that, we might layer like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in a traffic jam again. I'm never going to get to work on time. The world's ending because I'm in a traffic jam. You know, those are all, right, other layers of interpretation. So cognitive fusion, again, is imagining that my interpretations of reality are the same as reality. So if you're my friend or my partner or my parent, I'm in relationship with you, and I have a whole host of ideas about who you are, my interpretations of you, my descriptors of you. You're this type of person. You think this way. You tend to show up in the world in this way. These are all my interpretations. And what can often happen in life is we are relating, again, to the interpretations as if they're reality. Like I'm relating to you as if you're my interpretation of you, but you're not my interpretation. And nor is anything actually equal to the interpretation of it. And that's the extraordinary thing to discover. And that's what psychology is referring to as cognitive diffusion, where you come to recognize that interpretations are just interpretations. They're not facts. They're not equal to reality. Sometimes psychologists will refer to this as learning to look at thoughts rather than from thoughts. So when we're looking at from the thinking, if you will, from the view of interpretation, it's as if our interpretation is a pair of glasses, and we're so fused with that view that we imagine that view is the truth. I mean, if you want to see quick evidence of cognitive fusion, just turn on cable news and listen to people debate about politics. People are totally fused with their interpretations, or seemingly largely fused with them. They imagine that their interpretations are equal to reality. And They're not. They're interpretations. They're not, it's not as if the interpretations have no validity. I don't mean that at all. But what's going on here is always more than we think is going on here. It's always, the experience itself is always transcending the interpretation. So in my example of the person in our life, and we have all these interpretations and ideas and boxes that we put these people in that we know, including, of course, ourselves. Because we have all sorts of interpretations of what we are and who we are and what we're capable of and what our limitations are and our on and on and on and on. And the thing itself, the experience itself, whether it's of another person, of ourselves, of the events of life, always transcends what we think it is. It's always more. It always is beyond the categories. The categories, the descriptions can't contain what's here. And because what's here is too vast, there's too much information. You could say there's too much detail, there's too much complexity for it to ever be captured adequately in any of the interpretations. And this is the essence of, I mean, this last book that I wrote, This Extraordinary Moment, is the whole book is really like a meditation on this basic idea of fusion and diffusion, of coming to see that what's here can't actually be interpreted. Not comprehensively, not definitively. It is being interpreted to one extent or another. At least a lot of aspects of it are being interpreted. So how do we come to see? How do we essentially? Well, let me say this first: that it's almost as if there's the event of this instant, of this moment, and then the interpretation of it that's sort of layered on top of it. And it seems as if they're smeared together, they're sort of fused together, right? And so the exploration that I invite is coming to see in which the ways in which they're not the same, basically. I was sitting on the couch just kind of before joining all of you and reflecting on what I might want to talk about. And I was looking at, I have my computer right now on this dining room table, and I was looking at the table, and I was noticing the way in which even the word table is an interpretation, right? Like, what's actually here? Well, I could look at it and go, there's a thing called a table here, right? But if I actually feel, and this is the simple way of diffusion as I see it, which is to feel what's here, to feel the presence of our experience. Because the experience of this thing that I'm calling a table, that seems to be sitting here as a static object, a thing that I have a word for, table. Oh yeah, it's a table. That's an interpretation. What's actually here experientially is, and as I sat on the couch, I just was appreciating this. My experience of the interpreted object, the table, is this absolutely dynamic, alive dance of light and color and I mean, there's really no words for the experience of the supposed thing that's sitting there, like holding still, static, an object. There's no way to really, of course, describe experience, which is what I was saying earlier. It's not describable. But seeing that our experience is transcending these labels, which suggest many things. They suggest definability, they suggest stasis and continuity and division, and by looking at experience itself, feeling experience itself, without having to get rid of the labels, but just noticing what it is that's being labeled, a table in this case that I was describing, you can begin to see and feel the way in which this is so inherently transcendental. Every single aspect of it, including, of course, what you think of as yourself. Let me read apropos this a passage from my last book. Oh, the light's terrible here. I think I can see it good enough, barely. There was a great Pink Floyd song, "We Have Not Been Here Before." I don't know if that was the title of the song, but it was a lyric in the song, "We have not been here before." And the chapter is titled, "We Have Not Been Here Before." Stolen from Pink Floyd. But a very powerful thing to recognize, that you've never been here before. And of course, your interpretations would tell you that you have been. There's almost an endless number of ways that we can come to defuse from thinking, from our ordinary consensus reality interpretations. But so I'll read this chapter. The conventional view is that there's a kind of stasis or regularity to things and experiences, and that this stability defines our lives. Yeah, I'm sitting in my living room, right? I've been here before. I've been in my living room. I'm here a lot, especially the last year. But I've never been here before, actually, not experientially. We imagine that things are, for all intents and purposes, more or less the same from moment to moment. Right? But are they? That's the question. And our experience reveals to us in every instant that this is not the case, that things are not the same from moment to moment, despite what our conceptualizations of it in our language might suggest. This is how the world of experience and circumstance appears recognizable. Some mental emotional state arises and we recognize the pattern. It feels familiar. Oh yeah, I know what that is. It's, you fill in the blank. It's fear, it's joy, it's sorrow, it's ecstasy. Similarly, we see some object, like my computer or the table. We see some object or return to some place and recognize it more or less the same object or place that we'd previously visited. Oh, sure, that's my car or my house or my friend or the neighborhood I live in. That's the conceptualized world, the world of descriptions that we think we live in. But we don't actually live in that world. I mean, we do, but we don't, paradoxically. I mean, from one perspective, yeah, I live in the world of my descriptions and operate as if I do. That's part of the way life dances as that. But it's not the whole story. However, true as it may seem that experiences and objects have a kind of persistence or continuity to them from moment to moment, that they are essentially what they were when we last encountered them, the fact is that they are not, at least not exactly. And this is an amazing, like, just to get that one thing, like, it seems like this is the same room that I've been in countless times, and the same computer screen and the same faces that I've looked at least some of them on the Zoom call. But it's never exactly the same. Your friend or that emotion you're being visited by may look, feel, or behave in such a way that makes it seem recognizable to you. But the fact is that we've never actually experienced this moment before. Isn't that just amazing? It's never looked quite like this. It's never felt quite like this. The perception that's here. You know, I'm looking out my window and it's a scene I've seen many times before, but have never actually seen before. Not like this. The wind's never quite blown exactly this way. And the branches have never quite moved exactly this way. And the light has never been exactly like this. It's very, the light is the way it is right now. And in the next instant, it's slightly different, even if subtly so, right? We've never actually experienced this moment before. Yes, experiences appear and feel very familiar to us. But true as that sense of familiarity may be, the reality is that we've never actually felt this particular moment, at least not in this exact way. No experience, no moment, no person, place, or thing is ever quite the same, owing to its radically dynamic, non-static, alive nature. Imagine being transported to another world, a planet that's utterly foreign to you. Not a single thing about this extraterrestrial world could possibly be familiar or known to you because you've never actually seen, felt, touched, or tasted any part of it before. So it's a totally like a world you've never visited, right? Now, imagine your everyday experience to be this hypothetical foreign land. Whatever way you might conventionally describe what's happening, holding a glass of water in your hand, seeing a cloud-filled sky, hearing the sound of traffic on the street, feeling the wind upon your face, just go ahead and notice whatever is present here, traveling through this heretofore unseen world, exploring the remarkable experiential landscape that lies before you. This is the planet that you've never been on ever right now. It's absolutely like you're born anew in each instant. Both what is being seen and the apparent one seeing it, i.e. you, are reborn in every instant, fresh, every instant, absolutely new. Because everything is on the move. Everything is fluid, isn't it? Things are not holding still. The moment, the perception of this instant is a kind of appearance, we could say, a kind of arising, a happening. And the very arising of it, the very appearing of the moment, which of course is instantaneously, I'm making it sound like it's this slow appearance, but it's just boom, you know, just appears. But it's not like the moment appears and then it kind of stays like frozen, like there it is, fixed. No, it's not like that, is it? It's not frozen. It's moving. It's the birth of the moment is the passing of the moment simultaneously, right? Like my words are spoken, they're birthed. And the arising and birthing of my words and the thoughts and the ideas and the concepts are, they're being born and vanishing in the same single movement, aren't they? Since everything is new to you here, don't bother referring to any previously learned names or descriptors to make sense of what you're seeing, because those categories no longer apply. You're literally in a different world now. So we act as if we have all these reference points, which is our knowledge, and that's how we're able to call all this stuff by the names that we call it. So from the perspective of my knowledge, I know what this table is because I've seen it before, I've touched it before, I've had my computer on it before, I've eaten on it before, and then on and on and on. But the actual experience of it is, if I don't refer to the memory of it for a moment, and I'm just with it in this instant, I have no reference point actually to know what it is. I've never seen it before. I've never seen it exactly like this. This is what I mean by getting very precise, very specific with your experience. Like, what is here actually? Not what you remembered was here a moment ago, but what's here right now. And what's here right now is completely new, completely fresh. Just behold the infinite detail, depth, and dimensionality that's here. Not one iota of which have you ever seen, nor will you ever see again. Let the truth of this sink in, this astounding fact that you cannot possibly know what this world is that you are experiencing right now, for one simple reason: you've never actually been here before. Just as you're sitting here, just feel the way in which your experience is not holding still. Notice that the perceiving of the instant is alive. It is fluid. It's like a constant opening into something else. It's curious because it seems as if we are able to enjoy experiences as if there's a we could say it seems as if we can enjoy the forms, the external forms, whether they're the objects of the natural world or the man-made world, human-made world, or the objects of experience. So a moment arises, a sound arises, a feeling arises, a felt sense arises, right? All these things, the forms that, yes, it seems as if they're here enough, there's enough continuity to them that I can enjoy this moment. I am enjoying this moment. So this is a very completely wild yet very powerful paradox that this moment has no continuity to it. It's like the disappearance is instantaneous, the impermanence, the slipping away is just like that, right? So this is what I mean, like there's no reference point. In a sense, there's no forms, because the moment seems to come into form, but since the form is shape-shifting, is it a form? It's not a fixed form. I've said this before, it's like, look at a cloud, and you could say, well, yes, the cloud is a form, isn't it? But the cloud doesn't just hang out and stay in a certain form, does it? Even if it's subtle, the cloud is shifting its shape, isn't it? So what is the form of the cloud? It has no form, does it? No fixed form. So this moment has no fixed form either. You have no fixed form, whatever you think of as yourself. Because what you were a moment ago is something different now, as a form, as a shape, as an appearance, as a perception. So the paradox that really is a wild one is that it certainly looks like the forms are holding still enough so that we can enjoy them, the ones that are so-called internal to us and external to us. But if we really look, we can see that the forms are, as the Buddhists would say, empty. Empty in the sense of having identity. You can't really identify the form because whatever you just identified is now gone. So how can you identify the form? Which is that's the saying in Buddhism, that form is empty and emptiness is form. Well, that sounds, what do you mean? It's like, come on, you got to tell me it either has form or it's without form. It's got to be one or the other. But it isn't that way. It's both and beyond both. The formlessness of this, because it never quite takes a definite form, shows up as apparent forms, doesn't it? Just like each one of you, each one of us is an apparent form with a kind of seeming continuity to it, right? From moment to moment. But again, if we look, we come up empty-handed. We can't find the form. We can't find the identity. So that's the paradox. I seem to know what things are, but if I actually look, I can't really know and define what they are, owing to their ever morphing dynamism, right? Everything that I've been saying, none of it is philosophy. It's our actual experience right now. It's as concrete and non-abstract as anything could possibly be. It's the feeling of this moment, the feeling of this moment. Something's here, isn't it? There's a continuity to that presence. Something's always here, isn't it? And yet what's here is so clearly slipping away, vanishing, and yet always here. That's the formless dancing as apparent forms. And it's also, I mean, one of the really pragmatic, if you will, implications of this discovery of the ever liquefying nature of this is that the notions that we have as humans of being caught in things and stuck in things is, what did I write? I saw this morning, I was looking at this. For something to exist as a thing that we could be stuck in, there would have to be persistence, which direct investigation shows is not in fact the case. So if you imagine something, you're stuck in some situation or some circumstance or some thought stream or emotional whatever event or history or whatever we imagine ourselves somehow caught in or troubled by or trying to navigate, by noticing the impermanent nature of what's here. And it's not hard to notice that. It doesn't take 30 years sitting on a meditation cushion to discover this. Just look for one instant and see that the instant is no longer here. That's about how long it takes to discover impermanence. Right? It's showing itself constantly. Here it is. Boom, gone. So seeing that, it's like, I just read this wonderful thing from the Tibetan teacher Longchenpa, who writes very kind of poetically about a lot of the things I'm talking about. And Longchenpa says in the precious treasury of the way of abiding, there is no division between things arising and being freed. They converge in a single blissful expanse. No division between things arising and being freed. That's what I'm talking about. The moment is liberated in the instant of its arising. Your entire, it's all let go of in the instant of its arising. And the world is made fresh and anew in every instant, literally. Isn't it? I mean, where is what we call the past? It's not here, is it? And that's the great liberation to just notice that, to feel the reality of that. Because so many of our ideas about what's going on suggest permanence and continuity and stability and fixedness of things and the formed nature of things and the apparently definable, identifiable nature of things. But again, reality, this is the defusing from the interpreted world, is to see that experience is constantly transcending that idea of definability and identifiability of everything, of everything, including, again, what we think of as the self. So all the ideas we have about something about, I mean, because we not infrequently define all this actual fluidity and discontinuity in fixed ways, and we describe it like lacking or incomplete or missing something vital. And those, again, are all interpretations of something that's not interpretable. So discovering the uninterpretable dynamic, never fixed nature of this also liberates us from those notions of limitation and lack and boundedness that just can't be found, not in experience. They can be found conceptually in our ideas of things, for sure, and are often found to be the case. But so anything that you may imagine yourself conflicted about or confused about or somehow trapped in or identified with, stuck in, and so on, that we can certainly experience as humans, right? It's part of this, part of our experience. There's an opportunity in those moments to look at what you imagine yourself stuck in or identified with, or again, victimized by, as an experience or a circumstance, and feel the presence of it, and the, if you will, raw experiential presence of that interpreted event. And it will reveal its inherently non-fixed, non-stuck, non-limited, unlimited nature. The moment's unlimited and unstuck in the sense of there's no actual definition or description that can bind it or bound it or define it. So it's free of that. It's free. The moment is completely free of all the apparent boundary limits that the interpretive frameworks place upon it. It's free of those. Inherently. You are free inherently of any notions that might arise about who and what you are. I'd be happy to talk with any of you about all of this if you'd like to explore anything in particular around it. Oh, sorry, Zoe. I couldn't quite. I can't quite make out. You want to try again? Yeah, put it as close as you can up to your.
The image of a river comes to mind.
Image of a river. Uh huh.
Comes to mind exactly like a river.
Yeah.
Then I saw my thoughts as a river,
Mm-hmm.
and for once it was so much easier to befriend the thoughts or the speed of the thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, water is a wonderful. It's almost beyond being simply a metaphor in a way, because there's a sense of the fluid nature of this, the watery nature of everything, thinking as well, right? And it's so radical to see how like if you look at something like thought, and if you're with what you call thinking or thought in the instant of its actual appearance, okay, it's like this is the crazy thing, is like our actual experience is really sort of like a point event, isn't it? It's just now. And in a sense, it's the dissolution of all definitions, right? And all things, because it's like there's no duration in this point event. It's just now. And of course, that point event, if you will, this flash instant with no duration, magically shows up as the flow of time, the flow of space, the flow of thinking, the flow of interpreting, the narratives. So it shows up as all of that. Again, that's the paradoxical, the dance of emptiness dancing as all these apparent forms and narratives and stories. And so it's not as if I'm suggesting there's anything wrong with the narratives in the stories, because there's not anything wrong with them. They're the dance of life. One of the ways life seems to dance, right? But there's a different, maybe you can sense this, like to feel into the ungraspable nature of what's appearing, the formless nature of the forms, the empty nature of the forms. There's like it's an actually enrichment somehow of the forms. It's like, as I was sitting looking at the table, it's like table is like this, it's just this idea, this abstraction, but the actual experience of it was this alive, dancing, vibrant. The same thing with thoughts. Like, this is a really interesting thing to play with thinking. Like, we have a tendency to focus on thought in terms of a kind of in a reified way as a thing and as a potential obstacle and as a problem. But as an actual experience, thought is just more of this dynamic aliveness, isn't it? It's just energy. It's just liveliness, isn't it? Ultimately inconceivable and indescribable. So thought itself transcends what we think it is. What is thought? I mean, actually, what is it? Feel the presence of thinking. What is it? There's no answer to that question, of course, but I was talking about, just as occurring to me, just reflecting on what you were saying, Zoe, that in terms of fusion and diffusion that I started out speaking about, you know, that the sort of consensus reality idea we hold is that the world is made of separate parts and pieces, right? And that these parts and pieces are in relationship to one another. And so I'm a separate person having separate experiences, either external to me or internal to me. And then I'm trying to navigate those experiences and maybe free myself of those experiences, like thinking. But experience, again, if you go to experience itself, it will reveal that that interpretation is not accurate. It shows up as seeming separation. Like I can seem to be able to look at this thing called a thought, right? Like as if it's over there. But actually, it's so hard to kind of characterize this, but you can't actually find any separation between anything in your experience. And so that discovery of inseparability, the inseparability that's just here right now, that there's no any of the apparent pieces in my field of experience or parts, I can't find any edge to them. I don't find any gaps between one apparent piece and another apparent piece, do I? I just find a continuum of experiencing. So the field of experience right now has no clear demarcating points to it. It's just an absolute open-ended continuum, right? And so that right there cuts through that whole notion we have about there's something happening to me that I have to do something about. That's just absolutely rendered nonsensical when you feel the reality of experiencing itself, which is a whole. There's just a whole here. I'm not having thoughts. There's just a flow of experiencing happening that can look like a person having thoughts from one perspective, but from this other perspective, that's not it at all. It's just let's see if it's even possible to describe it. Yeah, it's just very peculiar. It's like I can look at the table, to come back to that example, and I can feel the perspective of me over here and the table over there, the object over there. So the subject-object distinction, that's consensus reality. That's the interpreted world, right? But is that really my experience? Or is that the entirety of my experience? Now let me just feel what I'm calling the table as an experience, because I am experiencing the table visually, tactily, right? And the experiencing of table and the one that might be beholding the table is an absolute seamless expanse. And that's a completely different perspective with a whole different felt sense to it, isn't it? I mean, play around with that sometime, maybe when you're being, well, I was playing around with this the other day where some state was arising that I would label as uncomfortable. I forget what it was exactly. with some discomfort. And I could feel that sense of me being John the person having an experience that I could see like an object there that I could name and describe, right? As if it was separate from me. And then I just felt the perspective that's also there simultaneously of just undivided presence of experiencing. And it was like, in a way, that thing, that state of mind just vanished. It didn't exist because there was no separation. And yet I could literally bounce back and forth between the two perspectives. Separate, nameable, describable, there it is, I can feel it. And then simultaneous to that, absolute inseparability and impossibility of identifying it as a thing. It's like bouncing from, there's a wave, I'm a wave, experiencing a wave of experience, to there's just an ocean of existence, literally. Dancing as the wave called John and the wave called whatever that discomfort moment that was appearing there. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? You have a sense of that in your own experience? The paradox of seeming separation, that is a sort of consensus reality view of things. And then the actuality of our experience in which no separation can be found. Feel that, feel your experience right now. Where is there one thing separate from another thing? Can you find that? Or do you just find feel what you think of as yourself, and then look at some object that you think of as other than yourself, okay? Whatever the object is, your computer screen, the view outside your window, anything. So there's that normal, if you will, conventional perspective of a subject looking at an object. Now feel your experience of that. And there's no boundary there, is there? Isn't that interesting? So which one is it? It's both and beyond both.
The sense of warmth is really interesting when the division is gone.
Yes.
It's a warmth which is called life.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, you're like, and there's a lot of different sort of the implication of it. It's like, I think the implication is an interesting word. It's almost like what does that moment perceived in this particular way seem to suggest, you could say. And the seems to suggest, or the felt sense of it, you could say, could be a feeling of like complete intimacy, right? Because it's radical intimacy. It's so close. It's as to be, you can't, nothing separate. That's how intimate it is. But it's also, another implication is that there is nothing to find. Because there aren't any things. And there's no one to find anything. So there's nothing missing from that perspective, is there? There's just the flow of experiencing without boundary. No subject, no object.
There goes the flow again.
Yeah.
The flow.
Yes.
Hi, John.
Hey, Sam.
Yeah, I've been practicing with what you've just been saying there recently. And about a week ago, I had a really good sense of where I could apply that kind of insight to the visual field, because I can do it more or less, I guess, with sensations and thoughts. I can get a sense that they don't feel separate.
Yeah.
I'm almost one with them, and I can. But I always struggled with the visual field. It always felt like there was some distance.
Yeah.
I got a real strong sense of that kind of like last Sunday, and I could sort of repeat the process that I went through to get there for several days afterwards, and then I sort of lost it. It seemed. I don't know if that's as common. It just seemed to. At one particular time, I could really get a sense of that insight, and then it seemed to fade over time. I don't know whether it's just it's a matter of finding a different route there, or I think also I'm kind of pursuing it a bit too much, perhaps focusing on it a bit too much, because I had that initial kind of breakthrough.
Right.
Yeah, I don't have any thoughts on that particular. Is it worth just sort of letting it go and just trying to, I guess, not focusing on that in particular?
Yes.
Yeah,
it's definitely
best.
It is the best, and one of the reasons it's I think, the preferred route from my standpoint is that it's sort of in harmony with the way reality is what, remember we were exploring at the outset of the call today, how look at the way in which nothing's holding still, right? So the way we typically frame experience is not that way, right? It's like even how you were describing, and this isn't a criticism, but it's just very human thing, is like, wow, you had an insight, you had an experience, and then you weren't able to sort of hold it in place, right? Like it just wouldn't be held in place and it slipped away. But that's that's exactly what's happening every instant. It's slipping away.
Yeah, sure.
So so this is very interesting, isn't it? So, and one of the reasons that you or I don't need to, or anyone doesn't need to hold on to any insider experience is because it's just the way it is. So it isn't really something to hold on to, and actually it would seem, as the apparently embodied creatures we are, that there's a lot of slipping in and out of these different perspectives all the time. Where we could be in a situation where we suddenly find ourselves referencing, in a sense, of being an individual in a world as a perspective, right? But so what? Do you see what I mean? In other words, it's okay, because that's just it's okay because it's just what it is in that moment. In other words, that perspective is just what's appearing. Reality seems to love to appear as other than itself, doesn't it? It seems to love that dance of seeming to separate itself from itself and then be in relationship to itself as another, right? I mean, imagine if you played a thought experiment where there was never any sense of otherness at all. What would it be like? I mean, it would just be, would there be in other words, I can experience the trees outside my window as other from me in a way, which is partially what enables it to show up as something that can be experienced. So that other perspective of there's just, well, let me use another example. It's like, if you're looking at a painting and you recognize that all it is just one thing, just paint on a canvas, right? There's no actually objects there. There's no, if you look at a Monet painting, there's no lilies floating on a pond, is there? However, it's enjoyable, isn't it, to see it as lilies floating on a pond? I would say it's enjoyable.
Yeah.
So it's like you get to have your cake and eat it too. You can recognize that actually there's no lilies floating on a pond. There's just a painting. with nothing separate. Or to use a dream analogy, what happens every night? You go on an adventure with all these people, places, and things. Sometimes it's a terrifying adventure. Sometimes it's a awe-inspiring, blissful adventure. But from the perspective of what it actually is, it's just one thing. There's no adventure. It's just a dream. It's just a single thing. There's no, like, I went to some interesting world last night in my dreams. It was very intricate and very detailed, and the relationships between these people I know, and it was very complex. And I had that whole experience, but actually it was just one thing, the dreaming consciousness, wasn't it? So again, this is the paradox, is that, so you had this moment where you saw that it was just a single field of light, let's say, without separate pieces. And then, well, the next thing you know, it's like you feel as if you've lost that, but you haven't. There is no losing that. It is just a single field of light that can look like separate pieces, right? Like right now, I bet you can let yourself bounce back and forth between those two perspectives right now. See me as a separate object, and then see that as just a field of light, like, and everything about this moment is a wholeness, isn't it? It's just one field of light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I find the former easier to grasp.
The former being seeing separate pieces, you mean?
Yeah, separate people, separate, yeah.
Right. Well, that's certainly our deeply conditioned, if you will, belief, supported by a lot of constant affirmation by what we would call the world.
Yeah.
Right. So that is the value, I would say, at least one potential value of coming together in these formats, to be like giving voice to this other perspective that's often either completely overlooked and but underappreciated for sure. So there's value in seeing that other perspective, because then we can enjoy it in a sense. Yeah. And, you know, as Zoe was talking about, there's something about it that's like actually pleasurable, like profoundly so, to feel that inseparability, to recognize it. I mean, it's the end of conflict. It's the end of division. It's the end of otherness. It's the end of anything of any lack or limitation. Right? So it's enormous in its beautiful implications, isn't it? So there's value in recognizing it, but we don't need to hold on to it as an experience, because we can't actually hold on to it as an experience, because experience doesn't hold still.
Right.
That's the thing.
Is the value in acknowledging the subject-object kind of perspective as a perspective as well, saying, oh, this is the particular perspective I'm looking through right now,
sure,
rather than just thinking that it's the norm? Yeah.
Right. To see that it is a perspective.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Rather than imagining that it's somehow the only reality. No, absolutely. That's part of the defusing from it. You're recognizing like, oh, well, that's a perspective. And what can be helpful to remember and see, you know, have the insight of is that well, from one perspective, we feel like we're individuals sort of trying to find the wholeness, locate it, recognize it, and not lose sight of it, right? Like you were kind of describing it that way, very understandably. But from another perspective, all there is the wholeness that can show up as individuals trying to find the wholeness. Right? And that's okay. You know, it's like even when we seem to be lost in identifying with ourselves as separate individuals trying to claw our way back to the wholeness, that isn't actually exactly what's going on, is it? That's just how it appears to be. So even when we seem to be lost in a point of view, lost in an interpretation, that's not actually as I sometimes like to say, you know, the real freedom, the real enduring freedom is to recognize that bondage never occurs. Because bondage is just a description of something that's beyond description. So coming back to my earlier point about the fluidity of this, Sam, it's such a powerful thing to come back to recognize that, like what you're describing, let's say you have an insight, we have an insight, and then it seems like it slips away, and now you're back in your life, like the life of seeming separation and division. But you're actually not. Remember what I was saying at the outset, this never really takes definitive form, definable form. Does it? Why?
No.
Because it's too fluid. So in a moment where it feels like you've lost touch seemingly with some insight, notice that you're just describing the indescribable in that moment. The mind is attempting to describe something that can't be described. And actually, this is constantly free in every instant. As experience, there's no, I mean, even the entire notion of like freedom and bondage is like, makes no sense from the perspective I'm talking about right now. I mean, none other than the Buddha in one of the sutras said, by incomparable enlightenment, I attained not even the least thing. In other words, nothing actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. Because that would be to then just reify something called enlightenment as being a thing, but it will slip away. I mean, this can't be held on to. Life won't have anything, life doesn't hold on to itself, you could say. It just is constantly letting go. It's constantly becoming the next thing, the next appearance. So we can just enjoy that fluidity. It goes into this perspective, seemingly this perspective, flowing, 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 dancing as all these different apparent forms and momentary appearances and experiences and perceptions, and then shape-shifting in the very next instant into something else, never holding still. Nothing to hold on to. Nothing we can hold on to. No handle. Grab hold of. Much as we might like there to be a handle. But that's okay. Even if we try to grab hold of a handle, even that's okay, because that's not what we imagine it to be either.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. There's a few folks I haven't seen on my Sunday Zooms. Happy to hear from any of you if you'd like to explore, share anything. Welcome to you, though, first and foremost.
I think it really helps us to look at the concept of ourselves. You know, we often hold it as so solid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've experienced ourselves in a certain way for so many years, you know, and,
Mm-hmm.
and letting go of that concept.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, you know, absolutely. I mean, that's the interesting thing though, is that if we come back to it's sort of this distinction I was making earlier about between the concept and the experience, and we fuse them together and we smear them together, we think they're the same thing.
Right.
So, but our actual experience of ourself, so-called, or we could say our experience of what's here, is not the same from moment to moment.
Right.
So it's like we have this constant, you know, the friend of our experience that will keep showing us the way in which this is not what we think it is, including self-identity. Because it's like what you think of as yourself, you feel the presence of your own being. Like, is it actually holding still? Is it actually fixed? Is it actually defined?
Mm-hmm.
Not an experience. It's just this explosion of dancing flavors and qualities and characteristics. And I mean, there's no way to put it into words, right? It's just this dance of indescribability. So what are you? You know,
Mm-hmm.
you're, in a sense, you're everything that's being experienced. And that, of course, is just constantly changing. So you're free of all the descriptions and self-definitions. They don't hold up under scrutiny.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think if we ever experience any kind of angst, you know, some fear, whatever, take that as an opportunity to look at that. Are we really that solid? That
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Absolutely.
You know, we work so hard to be able to solidify things. In other words, as a baby,
Mm-hmm.
we experience what you're describing, this fluid, and then we notice patterns,
Mm-hmm.
and then we notice that changing patterns have similarities, and then we notice that we can name similar patterns,
Mm-hmm.
and so we work real hard
Mm-hmm.
to be able to solidify this changing experience.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're trying to get back to what we naturally experience.
Right. What's interesting, and though I think helpful too, is to depersonalize it in the sense that we could say that what life does, what reality does, what the divinity does, whatever you want to call the magic show of this, is that its nature is apparently to show up as seemingly patterned, as seemingly nameable, as seemingly describable, as seeming to have a kind of continuity to it, right? It looks like something, actually. And so that's the dance of emptiness being form, apparently, right? It's looking like it is something. It's looking like it's describable. And that same miraculous reality that's seeming to be patterned can also explore the seeming patterns like we're doing and uncover the patternless nature of them, in a sense, the uncertain nature of the patterns, or the empty nature of the patterns, in that you can't come to the conclusion of what the pattern actually is. You know, like there's the pattern of a flavor of something, of an emotion, of a food. It shows up as a pattern, the pattern of, you know, I had eggs this morning for breakfast and it's a certain flavor, right? So that what is a flavor? It's an apparent pattern that I can name. It's like the flavor of eggs as compared to the flavor of cheese, right? Those are that's pattern recognition that is able to make distinctions between different flavors of life, right? I would never, it's very clear that to me, that life shows up as apparently patterned and flavorful with discrete, distinct, identifiable flavors that we can name and describe. Hence, language and concepts and pattern identification, right? But that same reality can be discovered to be unfindable as a definite, like, oh, here's what the essence of the pattern is. So we can't, they say when they're describing emptiness in Buddhism that it doesn't have a self nature. In other words, you can't get to the bottom of what the thing is. So it doesn't have an actual identity. It doesn't, and yet it shows up as having something apparently identifiable. I mean, that can sound like gibberish the way I'm talking about it right now, but this is our actual experience. It's like things are paradoxically known. They have like, this is definitely, this has a definite feel. I put my hand on the table. It's like very definite. It's like there's a presence that's recognizable and nameable as a felt sense of, like, I could call it the hardness of the table, right? And I could compare that with like the softness of my the material that of my shorts that I'm wearing. So I can feel like those two different textures, right? So what am I feeling there? It's a pattern, isn't it? I'm recognizing, and it's a familiar pattern. I can name it in a very general sense of hardness, softness, right? But when I investigate and I feel what's actually there, that I'm calling soft, let's say, where my right hand is touching my shorts and the fabric. It's like we're dropping down into this well of absolute mystery as to what that actually is. And if I feel the dynamism of it, well, then I'm just absolutely, like, the definitions just go out the window, because it's just, I can't pin it down because it keeps keeps slipping away from me, whatever the texture is. So again, it shows up though as seeming continuity, seeming regularity, seeming, I mean, even like in relationships, how do I know that you're Ed who comes onto the Zoom calls regularly? How can I recognize you? It's pattern recognition, right? I mean, I don't see your face right now, but often you have your camera on, and I reckon if I met you in person for the first time, because I don't think we've met, if I met you in person for the first time, I go, wow, there's Ed, I recognize him from the Zoom calls. So again, it shows up as patterned. It's pattern recognition, isn't it? The pattern of that is the form of Ed, the way he looks, the way he feels. But if I'm actually with the specifics of this seeming continuity that I call Ed, it's like I'm actually experiencing something that I've never experienced before. And remember, you were talking last week, I think, about kind of a referenceless perspective. We kind of were getting into that a little bit earlier, I think, before you joined the call, that it's like the reference point to identify it as a pattern that's repeating over time is the reference point of the past, isn't it? But if I'm just with this instant, which is what I actually am with experientially, I'm never with the past. I can't experience that reference point. I can only experience this. And as experience, there's no reference point to know who you are as something that's a repeating pattern, right? So, but that can show up still as repeating patterns. That's the dance of emptiness and form again.
It seems that the magic show is from similar to same. In other words, we see similar things and we conclude they're the same thing.
Right, exactly.
And then we get stuck in the sameness
Yes.
when we're always only in the similar.
Exactly. Very well said. Yeah. The similar is like, if I say that you're similar to what you were a moment ago, it's like I'm overlooking the fact that you're actually completely different. Because you only have to be different in one tiny way to be different. So I'm emphasizing the fact that you're more or less not different, which enables the pattern recognition seemingly, like, oh, the pattern's repeating, right? But if we pay attention in another way to what's actually here, we'll see that the patterns are not repeating. And that just cuts through the reification. It cuts through the thingness. And what you're left with is this dynamism that's the shapeshifter. And yet it never quite assumes a fixed form, which is, in a sense, you could say nothing ever really comes into form. What the Zen Buddhists call the unborn. It's never quite born in the sense of fixed. It's, you could say, maybe rather than calling it the unborn, we could just call it the constantly reborn. It's just constantly, Ed, you keep constantly assuming a new form. Will you just hold still for a minute? I'm trying to get a handle on who you are. You keep changing.
So that's, Buddha call that the rebirth consciousness.
Yeah, it's reborn in every instant. It's fresh. It's a clean slate. I mean, it seems like we have this ability to like drag what we call the past into the present somehow. And it's like this, I mean, my psychology peers are often very focused on how what's happened in the past is somehow driving what's going on right now. And that can be misleading, even if it may be helpful to see it that way sometimes. Because is the past actually still here? Where is the past? Where did it go? We've been, oh wow, it's 11:20. So an hour and 20 minutes we've been here. Everything that's occurred, where is it now? In that last hour and 19 minutes and 59 seconds or whatever. It's poof.
It's in your Zoom recording.
There you go. That's funny. Yeah. But then if you listen back to the recording, let's say, it won't be the same, will it? Your experience will be what it is in that instant. Hearing the words, contemplating the words, and so on. There's a chapter in the book called it was actually a dialogue that I was having with my father, who sometimes hops on these Zoom calls. And then I turned it into the chapter, but it's called The World is Made of Verbs. And it challenges that notion that there are even nouns. I mean, we have nouns in the language, don't we, as humans? But the nouns suggest fixedness, like there's a thing, when actually that thing is alive. So it's not a fixed thing. It's not a static thing. So in a sense, there aren't really nouns. It's so funny, you know, how I often will say this, how it's like whatever your human is looking for, just look at experience itself and it will reveal that it is that. You're looking for openness, more openness in your life, then look at your experience and you'll see it's radical openness. There's no edge to anything, right? Looking for a sense of connection and intimacy, just look at your experience. It's complete intimacy with everything and connection and everything touching everything else, right? You're looking for more sensuality in your life. Feel your experience. It's pure sensuality. Everything is just drenched with the sensuousness of this, the feeling of this. I heard Bill Moyers was interviewing Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, and he asked Joseph Campbell, isn't what humans are looking for a sense of meaning and purpose? And Joseph Campbell apparently said to him, no, I think, based on my reading of history and myths, what the human is looking for is a sense of being alive. They want to feel alive more than anything. And I remember hearing that and thinking, it's so funny. It's like, just look at reality. You're looking to feel alive and all there is feeling alive. Isn't that funny? I mean, that is what's here, is feeling alive. There isn't anything else. Everything is feeling alive. So again, experience showing us that what we're looking for is already here as experience itself. This explosion of vitality, absolute powerful presence of this, the energy, the Shakti of existence itself, right? Just exploding with aliveness in every instant, bursting forth with aliveness, isn't it? You don't have to take a workshop like learning how to feel more alive. Life is just 24/7.
Well, we spend 12 years feel more dead.
Feel more dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How to feel dead when you're alive.
And that's just an innocent misinterpretation, that feeling of not being alive, basically, feeling like somehow deadened. It's just if you actually notice what's here, it's anything but that. It's just drenched with vitality. Just feel that. Feel the way that, just feel how alive this is, the beingness of this moment, the electric nature of it. Every single aspect of the experiential field is electric, alive. Every flavor, every texture, every quality, every little ripple of momentary perception is just pure vitality, isn't it? The pure presence of everything. We're never apart from that, because that is the basis of everything, is that pure aliveness, pure, the very energy of reality. That also seems to be pervaded by some kind of remarkable intelligence that shows up as all this seeming structure and interrelationship between apparent pieces and parts. I mean, it's quite something, isn't it? The dance of the human body being a wonderful example of that. And this conversation being yet another example of that, the incredible dance of intelligent energy that we call conversation and language and communication. Isn't it? It's brilliant. It's just phenomenal. Sounds being made somehow, vibration, energy vibrating with a kind of meaningfulness somehow encoded in the vibration. And then the hearing of that, I mean, how is anything heard? And then the understanding of that and the translation of those vibrations and sounds into meaningfulness. I mean, wow.
Oh, John?
Hey, Michael.
Hey, good morning. I've been on pretty much the whole time. And I know that it's getting
Mhm.
close to the 11:30
Mhm.
quitting time. I just wanted to say went to bed earlier than normal and got up earlier than normal. That I thought I would have plenty of energy, but I've been sort of dozing off, sitting in my chair,
Mhm.
so I haven't been fully present. But yeah, I'm really. It's not that there's light at the end of the tunnel, but at least I recognize that I'm in a tunnel, which is a step forward. But as a Tibetan Lama had said to me a number of years ago, he said, "You have a scorpion in your heart. You have tremendous anger in you." And at the time, I couldn't even see it very well. Now I am, and yeah, it's off the meter, and it manifests in so many different ways. But I'm working with it, and I'm facing it squarely, and every once in a while it begins to. I can sense a movement toward dissolution, but it doesn't. It comes right back. It's like the Sorcerer's Apprentice, the Mickey Mouse character in Fantasia. The more he bails it out, it tries to remove the water with a bucket, the more it just keeps coming back.
Mhm.
But so I very well may, as the Lama indicated, may be destined for an unfavorable future. But I'm not going down without a fight, however in vain that might be.
Yeah, I'm always very cautious myself and recommend caution for others around taking to heart what apparent authority figures might say about who and what we are, even esteemed lamas, and just to say that you know, you may not sense this or feel as if you're not sensing it, but the radiance that makes all of this magical, mysterious life force that's giving rise to everything is what each and everything is absolutely made of. I mean, you are that illuminating force of the universe. And what else could you possibly be? And so from that standpoint, everyone has the potential to feel that and recognize that, because that is so, that is what we are made of. And it can seem as if it's somehow far away. But I do, as I was saying at the outset of the call, that from my standpoint, all of that has everything to do with the way that we're rendering what's appearing. And that there's another way, even with something as uncomfortable and difficult as the state we call anger can be. You were talking about that. That's something, you know, maybe I can explore with you another time, not right now, but that it's also the fuel and force of the cosmos itself, just as an energetic. It's very easy to get caught up in and seemingly lost in the content of anger and what it seems to be telling us about how we've been wronged, or life has wronged us, or, you know, and then the stories of wanting retribution, you know, all this very complex interplay of phenomena, you could say, that make up this gestalt called anger. But to feel it as just presence, just to feel it's more its more basic nature as presence, as energy, moving kind of from the content of it, which is very convoluted and complex and painful often, to the sheer presence of it as Shakti, as life force itself, can be one potentially helpful way to find another perspective on that which you might find yourself from time to time.
No, what I'm finding is it's not workable. There's nothing that I can do with my mind when it's really. I mean, as I said, it's like putting a finger in the dike. The torrent, you can't hold it back, and it was deal breaker for Dharma practice in this lifetime. I mean, I don't know in the bigger picture, how this.
I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a story from the Zen tradition, because I think what's at the center of all of this ultimately that makes navigating sometimes a lot of life seem to be so challenging is the placing of ourselves at the middle of experience. And so now suddenly there's someone there that needs to deal with this situation. In other words, you're having the experience of anger in this case, or whatever it might be for someone, and that you're feeling like it's happening to you. I mean, that's sort of the basic sense that we can have of things. And I was speaking, I don't know if you heard it, but we're talking with Zoe when I were talking about like feeling the way in which there's no separation there from another perspective. There's a great story in the Zen tradition. Well, I'll leave us with this story where at least I'll probably butcher the story, but as I remember hearing it, the student is struggling with some inner demons and goes to his master. How do I deal with these demons that are just tormenting me, inner demons? And the teacher gives the student all these various practices to deal with these energies that are bothering the student so much, mantras and meditations and visualizations. And one by one, the student utilizes these different practices and eliminates the demons. But there's this one demon that just won't go away, no matter what practices the student engages in. It just won't go away. And then just in a moment of epiphany and insight, the student jumps into the mouth of the demon. Yeah. That's the vanishing of the demon in that moment. It's the most counterintuitive thing you could ever imagine. Yeah, I was playing around with just that very thing. I talked about it earlier too, when I was being visited by this uncomfortable state. And I was just playing with that perspective of like, is there a me navigating this state, or is there just this inseparability? And where there was no subject object, it was just pure. There was just, I couldn't find any dividing line, and it was like jumping into the mouth of the demon. It was like, it just was like, it wasn't there. Without in any way pushing it away or denying its presence. In fact, counterintuitively, quite the opposite. The full surrender into the energy of it, in a sense. It's not, I'm using words, it's really not like that, but it's more like just feeling the inseparability. And so, but that's something, maybe you and I can chat about another time. And
all right, John, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining me. Always a pleasure. Have a beautiful rest of your day or evening, and maybe I'll see you another Sunday. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Okay, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.